From the moment 100 Days of Lies reached audiences, it refused to be a story people could simply watch and move on from. Days after the credits rolled, viewers were still talking about it, rewatching scenes, debating choices, questioning motives, and most of all, feeling something they couldn't easily put into words. It wasn't just because of the plot. It was because 100 Days of Lies touched something deeply human, the idea that love is not always loud, that honesty doesn't always arrive on time, and that sometimes the hardest choice is not between right and wrong, but between truth and protection. At the center of that impact was the cast. Every performance felt restrained in the best possible way. No exaggerated declarations, no unnecessary drama. Instead, the actors lean into silence, into pauses, into the kind of emotional tension that lives in what is not said. Audiences didn't just watch the characters, they read them. Every look carried history. Every hesitation felt intentional. That restraint is what made the romance so powerful. The love story in 100 Days of Lies wasn't built on grand gestures. It was built on timing, on proximity and distance, on the ache of wanting something but choosing to wait because the consequences of rushing felt heavier than the pain of holding back. Viewers recognized that feeling immediately, because most people have lived it. The film didn't ask audiences to believe in fantasy romance. It asked them to remember the kind of love that exists in real life, the kind shaped by fear, responsibility, and unfinished conversations. The kind where feelings don't disappear just because circumstances say they should. What made the cast unforgettable was how convincingly they carried that weight. You could see it in their posture, in how they stood near each other without touching, in how they spoke carefully even when emotion pressed against the edges of their control. The chemistry wasn't explosive, it was restrained, and that made it linger. Fans often say they felt the romance more than they saw it. That was intentional. The film understood that romance isn't always about closeness. Sometimes it's about distance and how difficult it is to maintain it when your heart has already crossed the line. 100 Days of Lies let the audience sit in that discomfort without rushing to resolve it. And then came the outcome, the part that truly divided, moved, and haunted viewers. The final choice. Instead of offering a clean, comforting resolution, the film chose honesty over satisfaction. It didn't give audiences exactly what they wanted. It gave them what the story needed. And that decision is why people can't let go. The ending wasn't about winning or losing love. It was about acknowledging its cost. By the time the final moments unfolded, viewers understood that the characters had already changed. The lies had served a purpose. The waiting had taught them something. And the truth, when it finally surfaced, wasn't freeing, it was grounding. That's why the ending stayed with people, because it respected the audience enough not to simplify emotion. Some viewers wished for a different conclusion. Others defended the choice fiercely. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: the ending felt real. And reality, when portrayed honestly, doesn't always come with closure. It comes with understanding. The cast carried that understanding beautifully. They didn't overplay the final moments. They trusted silence. They trusted the audience. And that trust paid off, because viewers filled the gaps with their own experiences, their own memories, their own unresolved feelings. 100 Days of Lies became more than a film. It became a mirror reflecting how often people protect love by hiding it, how often timing interferes with truth, how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not confess, but wait or let go. Audiences can't let go of 100 Days of Lies because it didn't tell them how to feel. It simply showed them what feeling looks like when it's complicated, restrained, and painfully human. The cast gave those emotions a body. The romance gave them a heartbeat. And the final choice gave them meaning. And that combination, honest performances, quiet love, and an ending that refuses to fade, is why 100 Days of Lies doesn't end when the screen goes dark. It follows you. Because some stories aren't meant to be finished. They're meant to be felt. Long after viewers finished debating the ending, 100 Days of Lies continued to surface in quieter ways. Not through headlines or viral clips, but through personal reflections. People began sharing what the film reminded them of, relationships they paused instead of pursued, truths they delayed, moments when silence felt safer than honesty. That response wasn't accidental. It was the result of a story that trusted its audience to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. What made the film linger was how carefully it handled time. The 100 days weren't just a plot device, they became a shared emotional rhythm. Each day represented a choice to wait, to protect, to hold back. And as audiences followed that countdown, they began feeling the weight of time the same way the characters did. Not as something dramatic, but as something heavy and slow. The cast understood this rhythm deeply. They played their roles as if time itself were pressing against them. You could see it in the way scenes were paced, moments stretched just enough to let emotion breathe, but never so long that it spilled into sentimentality. The actors allowed viewers to experience longing without relief, which is far harder than portraying passion. And because of that, the romance felt earned. There was no single scene audiences pointed to as the moment. Instead, people talked about accumulations, a series of near confessions, interrupted conversations, and shared silences that built tension without release. This approach mirrored real relationships, where meaning isn't found in one dramatic exchange, but in everything that almost happens. As discussions grew, many viewers realized something unexpected. They weren't rooting for a specific outcome anymore. They were rooting for emotional honesty, whatever form it took. That shift is rare. Most romantic films ask audiences to want a couple together at all costs. 100 Days of Lies asked a different question. What does love look like when staying together isn't the only measure of success? The final choice answered that quietly. It suggested that love doesn't disappear just because people choose differently. That sometimes caring deeply means respecting timing, boundaries, and growth, even when it hurts. And for many viewers, that idea felt more mature, more comforting, and more truthful than a conventional happy ending. The cast carried this message without ever stating it outright. Their performances trusted subtlety, a breath before speaking, a look held just a second too long, a decision made without explanation. These details invited the audience to participate rather than consume. And participation is what turns a film into a lasting experience. Even weeks later, people found themselves replaying scenes, not to analyze them, but to feel them again. The quiet tension, the restraint, the emotional honesty that didn't rely on words. In a world full of loud storytelling, 100 Days of Lies stood out by whispering. That whisper stayed. Because the film didn't promise resolution, it promised recognition. It recognized the audience's own experiences with delayed truth, with love shaped by timing rather than desire. And in doing so, it validated feelings people rarely see reflected on screen. That is why audiences can't let go. Not because 100 Days of Lies told a perfect story, but because it told an honest one. A story that understood love as something fragile, complicated, and deeply human. And when a film understands its audience that well, it doesn't fade. It becomes part of the conversation people have with themselves long after the final choice has been made. As time went on, something even more interesting happened. The conversation around 100 Days of Lies stopped being about the characters and started being about the viewers themselves. People no longer asked, why did they choose that ending? They asked, what would I have done? That shift is where the film quietly deepened its grip. Audiences began to realize that the final choice wasn't meant to be judged. It was meant to be understood. The film never framed the decision as right or wrong. Instead, it treated it as inevitable, shaped by everything that came before it. By the time the last scene arrived, the choice felt less like a twist and more like a consequence. And consequences, unlike surprises, stay with people. The cast played a crucial role in making that outcome believable. There was no sense of regret exaggerated for drama, no forced sense of closure to comfort the audience. What the actors conveyed instead was acceptance, not happiness, not sadness. Acceptance, the kind that comes when you've carried something long enough to understand its weight. Viewers felt that immediately. Many said the ending felt unfinished, but not incomplete. Life, after all, rarely offers clean conclusions. And 100 Days of Lies respected that truth. It trusted audiences to sit with ambiguity, to resist the urge for tidy resolutions, and to acknowledge that love doesn't always arrive at the moment we want it to. That respect created loyalty. People defended the film passionately because it didn't manipulate emotion, it reflected it. The romance wasn't designed to fulfill fantasy. It was designed to explore restraint, responsibility, and the emotional cost of waiting too long or acting too soon. Even the title took on new meaning. At first, 100 Days of Lies sounded like deception. By the end, audiences understood it differently. The lies weren't cruel. They weren't selfish. They were